So we have been hearing all day so far from vendors, not just talking about their solutions, but talking about solutions from other companies and how to think about the problem and where the dangers are. And now you get to hear from someone who actually has to put in place security policies and ensure compliance with those policies at real large retail companies. So hopefully everybody's awake now, even though he's the only thing that stands between you and lunch.
And I hope to make it not too bad until then, so bear with me. Thanks a lot, Richard. Okay, I think we got it. Thank you very much, Richard. My name is Gerald Beuchelt. I'm the Chief Security Officer for Demandware. And as Richard indicated, Demandware is a company that provides services for retailers. We have about 600 active e-commerce websites for all kinds of clients, including Adidas, Nike, Burton Snowwear, Columbia, Godiva, so a lot of different brand name retailers who run on our websites. We have about 150 customers, 13 data center locations today. And now there we go. And about 16 million items that we process every month. So there's a lot of e-commerce transactions, a lot of money crossing through our systems, and our customers are obviously relying on us to make sure that those transactions and their respective websites are safe and secure. So what I'm going to do right now is talk a little bit about the relationship between security and compliance, and focus a lot on compliance. So far you heard a lot about how you can secure systems using IBM technology, using Cisco technology, or other technologies that are out there. But at the end of the day, there is also a question to be asked: why are we doing this beyond the basic reason of, well, keeping our system secure? I mean, is there any other reason why we actually want to do that? And that goes back really to the question. Sorry, that was a little bit fast. That goes really back to the question: why do we do compliance? There are a couple of reasons why a company like Demandware is interested in doing compliance. First of all, we process many, as I said, we process many e-commerce transactions every day, every month. And obviously we have a lot of credit card information involved in that. If we're not compliant with certain standards, we will lose our indemnification from the credit card companies with regards to fraud. So if you think about it, we're a small company, a couple of $100 million of revenue, processing billions of dollars of transactions. If something goes really wrong, we don't have the resources to pay any kind of fraudulent claims. So we have to be compliant for that. There are other reasons to be compliant as well. Obviously, you have all kinds of regulations out there that require you to be compliant. Examples for that in the U.S. are the Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, or some other standards in the financial industry. The medical industry has very other compliance standards as well, HIPAA. And other geographies, like for example the European Union, also require you to be compliant with certain regulations and standards as well to satisfy their needs, for example, for privacy. So compliance is really mandatory from a number of different perspectives, both from a business perspective as well as from a regulatory perspective, as well as also in terms of building trust with your customers. As I said, we're a service provider for our customers, and our customers are obviously interested if we give our website, our crown jewels for our online presence to you, is that really secure? I mean, can we trust you at all? And obviously, I can go in as Chief Security Officer and say, yeah, sure, trust me. We're really secure, don't worry about it. Would you trust me? Well, maybe, I don't know. But our customers really want a little bit more than just our word. And so compliance programs come really in as some sort of external certification that we really abide by all those security standards and all the security requirements that we go by. In the following, I just want to go quickly over a couple of those compliance standards as they pertain particularly to e-commerce retail, but they also can be applied to other areas as well. And then dig a little deeper where they have shortcomings and also where they can be extended. So the first one we'll be looking at is PCI DSS 2.0. PCI DSS is a compliance standard that is maintained by the Payment Card Industries Security Council, which is a consortium of cardholder companies and other companies that are interested in working around credit card security. That has been around since about 2005, 2006. PCI DSS talks about what kind of security requirements you have to fulfill in order to securely process credit card transactions. If you take a close look at what those requirements are, you will find a lot of the security areas that we have been talking about before. The areas about firewalls and perimeter security, the areas about data security, encryption, which PCI DSS talks about log management, access management, and all those different areas that we have heard about before in the context of information security. And they have for each of those respective requirements checklists that you have to essentially go through as a vendor who works with the credit card information and ensure that those requirements are actually met. For smaller organizations with less than hundreds of thousands of credit card transactions, you can do those kind of assessments yourself. The PCI Council publishes on their website, and I think in the material that's given to you, there's a link to it. The PCI Council publishes self-assessment questionnaires. So if you have a company that has a web presence, you take in the credit card information, you want to make sure that if something goes wrong with your website, you are protected through the programs by the credit card companies. You can essentially fill out a self-assessment questionnaire. That self-assessment questionnaire goes through all the requirements for the PCI DSS standard, and you can essentially just check off, yeah, we have a firewall, yes, we review those firewall rules, yes, we have access management for our employees, and effectively at the end of the day come to the conclusion that you're fully compliant with the PCI standard, and then have that, depending on how big you are, also certified by an outside assessor. Going through that gives you, as I said before, the liability protection against fraudulent transactions. So if you have any kind of presence, if you're processing credit card information in any kind of way, it would be a really good idea, if you haven't done so already, to go through PCI DSS certification. There are also other standards that the PCI Security Council provides. One of them is PADSS. And sometimes people confuse a little bit PCI DSS and PADSS. PCI DSS is intended to cover systems, so your website as it is rolled out with all the databases connected, all the payment providers connected, etc., etc. PADSS is really focused on an application that you can buy off the shelf in a store. So if you buy a credit card management software from a vendor in either a store or online or as part of a transaction, then what you really should pay attention to is if that application or that app on the cell phone is PADSS certified. If it is, then again, it guarantees you that any kind of transaction that goes through that application is meeting the necessary requirements of the PCI Council, and again indemnifies you against claims against liability and fraud. There are other initiatives that the PCI Council does as well. So they're giving out implementation guides. You can go to their website and take a look at how you can actually apply those standards to your particular environment. There's some guidance out there, and the resources provided there are fairly useful. At the end of the day, you should always go back to a certified assessor and work with them in order to get the certification status. Another set of standards, which are much more comprehensive than the PCI standards, are the SSA 16 Service Organization Controls. It's a long word, sorry, I didn't make this up. So those kind of control standards have been developed by a number of auditors mainly in the US, but also internationally, that are essentially looking at the financial stability and integrity of companies. It started to, just a little bit about the history of that standard. That standard has been known until recently, about 2011, as SAS 70. And that standard has been rolled over now into SSAE 16. SSAE 16 differentiates between three types of service organization controls. And those reports are really intended for customers, for example, for our customers, to better understand our security posture. So they don't focus on credit card information alone, but instead they focus on 5 what are called trust principles. Those trust principles include general security, confidentiality, integrity, availability, and privacy. So all those 5 controls are essentially measured and ensured that they're implemented across the companies such as ours. If we do this, if we go through a SOC 2 reporting event, then at the end of the day, an external auditor, a trusted third party, will generate a report that can be consumed by our customers. So our customers can essentially get the opinion of an outside third party to better understand whether we are fully compliant with the requirements laid out by SSA 16 in the SOC 2 reporting. This is really, really, really important for a lot of our customers because, as I said before, our customers going in and looking at me saying, like, do I trust you, do I not trust you, is really an important step. So you have to establish a trust relationship at an organizational and at a personal level as well. But having an additional outside third party really go in and take a look at the entire system that you're offering is critically important for all kinds of trust building events and also making sure that it is really acceptable for a customer to effectively use your cloud solution or use your service in the internet as a viable solution. Another standard that is fairly important, not so much in the Americas, but much more internationally and specifically in Europe, is the ISO 27000 series of standards. Those standards deal a lot with information system security and how to implement them. One of the core items in the ISO 27000 set of standards is the development of an information security management system. So you really build an entire process, an entire system around the security aspects or the security areas that you have starting to roll out. And effectively, if I go back to David's presentation just a few minutes back, effectively provide that governance framework for really employing the security analysis and security intelligence on top, and then driving that down into the various different stovepipes that you had underneath there. So really, ISO is really helping you in terms of making sure that those kind of security best practices that you're starting to roll out in your company are effectively implementable and then also governable. How am I doing for time? No? Still okay. So how can those compliance standards help you in terms of going to the market? As I said before, there's a crucial requirement for certain compliance standards, such as the Sarbanes-Oxley standard in the U.S. or the European Data Privacy Act in Europe. You have to comply to those. The other things that drive and enable you with going compliant with a compliance standard are the liability protections from PCI and from similar standards. And then finally, we were discussing the requirements of building a trust with your customers, customers trusting your security posture, and standards such as the SSA 16 Service Organizational Control Reports, as well as the ISO 27000 reports, are really helping out there in terms of building that kind of trust. What is the problematic about going into those standards? Well, to be honest with you, just really going through those kind of audits and through those checks with the external third parties is very time costly, and it's also a very expensive proposition. For example, we've been, as a company, we have been PCI compliant for the past 6 years. So for the past 6 years, we had one auditor or a couple of auditors coming in once a year, going through the entire environment, the entire production environment of the company, and verifying that all aspects of our service that we are offering to e-commerce retailers are fully compliant with the PCI standard. So we are storing all credit card information in encrypted form. We are protecting the personal information of customers that we store in our system. We are doing the right things with regards to disaster recovery, backup, availability. And going through an entire system for a fairly complex system takes a lot of time. So the company has to invest a lot of money in order to go through, and it takes the auditors a lot of time to really write up a comprehensive report that fairly reflects this environment that we have. As we go through other standards, such as the Service Organizational Control reports or the ISO 27000 reports, this problem becomes even bigger. The issue there is those standards are typically much more complex, much more encompassing, they might go much deeper into the details of how the entire environment works, and it does not focus solely on the credit card environment. So we have to include many more people within the company that need to be interviewed, that need to provide evidence and reports, and obviously the auditors have to consume that in order to build their report. So a big issue about going through a compliance process is obviously the cost in time and also in resources. What other frameworks for managing towards compliance are out there? We talked earlier about, David talked earlier already, mentioned it briefly, there's the COVID framework published by ISACA. COVID is a framework that helps you to better understand or to better organize and govern your entire information systems, policies and procedures, and how to actually implement them across the entire company. So what it does, it provides sample org charts, it provides sample processes, sample policies, and really takes a very close look at how you have to divvy up the responsibility and the accountability for certain processes and outputs in IT across the entire company. And I strongly, as soon as you reach a certain size with your company, or as soon as you want to formalize a lot of those programs, I really, really strongly encourage you to take a look at either this one or others. You may also want to take a look at what the U.S. National Institute for Standards and Technologies NIST, has published. There's a set of documents known as the Special Publications, which talk a lot about information security governance, risk management, mobile devices, encryption, etc., etc. Going through those standards published by NIST, which are freely available, can really help you fine-tune a lot of the requirements that you may have with regards to defining information security policies, data retention policies, establishing processes, or really verifying that they are working. There are other frameworks available as well. For example, the financial industry has a body called the FFIEC, which in a similar kind of way publishes information specifically relevant for the financial industry and how it would work. This is fairly US-centric, but certain general ideas from those standards can definitely be taken out there as well. And then finally, one thing I would like to mention, the Software Engineering Institute, the SEI, at Carnegie Mellon University has, over the past 20 years, developed a capability maturity model, CMM, which has been applied to a number of different areas, whether it be software engineering, systems engineering, but also security engineering and security architecture. So it might definitely be worthwhile looking out at some of the work that the SEI has been putting out there and seeing whether you can leverage that in your compliance efforts as well. So So what are the concerns with compliance? What kind of compliance standards are we concerned about in North America? For the U.S., as I mentioned before, Sarbanes-Oxley is a very important compliance standard for any kind of public company. So if you're a public company and you want to do business in the U.S., you have to comply with regulations set forth by Sarbanes-Oxley. There are a number of other financial industry-related laws and regulations out there as well. For example, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, GLBA, which requires you to, certain types of reporting if you're a bank or if you're doing business in that area. Within the medical industry, you have the HIPAA Act, as well as the Affordable Care Act, which provides additional safeguards for patient privacy and for data sharing between hospitals and provider organizations. All those standards define really a lot of the frameworks for how you have to run your internal IT environment in order to be compliant with those laws. In Europe, one of the bigger concerns is data privacy. Europeans have a tradition of more than 20 years of having a fairly comprehensive and very strict privacy regime about individuals or personal data. Right now, this privacy directive has actually undergone a major change. So some of the new requirements that will be coming out is that if you're storing any information about a European subject or European citizen, and you are subject to a breach, so data gets lost, you have to notify the respective authorities within 24 hours. Those are things that are changing right now and becoming even more strict. So as soon as you have any customers that you deal with in the European Union, you really want to make sure that you get a really good understanding about what the privacy regime for the specific countries that you're working in actually looks like. In Asia and the Pacific Rim, you do not necessarily have as many privacy concerns, but one of the areas that we found very interesting when expanding into the Chinese market was that in order to be able to do business within the People's Republic of China, we actually had to, or would have had to if we had chosen to go that way, we would have had to escrow the private keys for certain encryption technologies with the authorities. That means obviously that if they decide that it is important to decrypt some of the data that you store, they could do so, which we ultimately found to be problematic from our compliance requirements with regards to PCI and some of the other obligations that we have to our customers. And from that perspective, we actually did not go that route and changed our Asia-Pacific strategy. So I think the lesson learned here is really that you have to make a very conscious decision in regards to going one way or another and look very closely at the requirements and the regulations that you have to abide by. So we talked a lot about compliance, which is, as I sometimes say, just checkbox checking. It's like, do you have a firewall? Yes, great. Is the firewall configured properly? Yes, great. So you go through all of that, and what that leads to sometimes is complacency. You really go in, people go through their checklists. Yeah, we have all the firewalls, we have all the antivirus, we have everything is in place, and about 3 weeks later they get hacked or they get compromised or whatever. So what happens there? Those compliance standards are fairly static, right? I mean, they were defined at a given point in time to address the security concerns at the time. PCI DSS, for example, was defined in 2010. So it was sufficient, more or less, at the time, 2010. But as we have heard from the various speakers today, the security threat landscape is actually changing very actively. So in order to be able to really run your organization in a secure way, you do not want to be only compliant with certain checklists that have been published before, but what you actually want to do is you really want to go out and actually do the risk assessment, which is typically a requirement of every single compliance standard. You want to take that seriously. So you really want to go out and figure out what are the threats, who are the threat actors, and how does that go in there. That is really one of the crucial elements of how compliance and risk management can play together. So what do you need to do for such a risk assessment that is supportive of building a much more comprehensive set of augmenting controls that you have to add to your compliance list. You need to take a look at the threat actors. Who's trying to attack you? How are they trying to attack you? What's actually going on? How are your systems vulnerable? I mean, you can do a vulnerability scan for a certain, from a technology perspective, but you also have to take a closer look at the overall vulnerabilities inside your organization. You want to better understand what kind of exploits are out there. So today, if you go around and look in the somewhat darker areas of the internet, you'll find you can buy all kinds of exploits for certain vulnerabilities in Windows, in Mac OS, or in Android. And then ultimately you want to effectively come to a conclusion. What is the actual risk that you're exposed to? And risk is often, not always, but I like it in general because it gives a good general sense, defined as the likelihood of something bad happening to you, and if it actually did happen, what's the impact? Right? So how likely is it that some threat actor can go out and attack you? And if they were actually successful, what would the impact be? For that, many people have used for a very long time a risk heat map, right? So you essentially have impact versus likelihood. You have a very low risk if there's almost no impact, and it's very unlikely. And you obviously have a very high risk if something is very likely, and you would be impacted by the law. So what can we do? Or what do we want to do with this heat map? We really want to mitigate the risk as much as we can. So we either want to reduce the likelihood that something can happen by putting up additional safeguards, or we want to reduce the impact that a certain risk can have on our environment by making sure that it's either contained within a specific network, or it's only limited to a certain subset of users, or limited to certain data. So what you want to do here in order to mitigate a risk from a higher level of concern to a lower level of concern is you want to define your own customized countermeasures. You want to go in and make sure that those countermeasures address the risk and then either limit the likelihood and or the impact, and add those additional countermeasures that you identify here as part of your compliance standards list. And that's really something I really want to emphasize here. If you just go by the compliance lists that have been given to you in the form of PCI or ISO or whatever, you really end up with a security posture that is good for 2010 or earlier, not with what you need to do today. Then there are certain other risk treatments that you may want to look at. You cannot always reduce the likelihood. For example, if you're a retailer and you sell things that people don't like anonymous activists, those kind of people, you cannot necessarily reduce the likelihood of them attacking you with a DDoS attack. At the same time, you can look at other alternatives, how you want to treat that risk, right? And the usual other risks are avoidance. If I'm a retailer and I for example, sell fur coats, then that could inspire the ire of a lot of people that are protective of the environment, and I would be attacked. Well, maybe I can just avoid that by not selling fur coats, as an example. Another example is transfer. You want to transfer risk. So if something happens and you're impacted by financial loss, you can transfer the risks through insurance or through liability protection, for example, in the form of taking advantage of the liability protections that the card companies actually offer you if you are PCI compliant. So risk transfer is definitely one of the very important aspects of risk management as well. And then finally, you can accept the risk. You want to do business, you actually want to sell your products, you want to be out on the internet, you want to be able to interact with your own customers, and you want to sell. Well, at some point in time, you have to accept a certain level of risk. You can be hacked. Yes, you can lose data. And that is a business decision that you have to do at some point in time. I was talking about the example of a fashion retailer, for example, a DDoS attack about from anonymous activists who were concerned about some fashion retailer actually manufacturing in Bangladesh. We had this terrible disaster a couple of weeks back over there where the factories collided. And there have been certain attacks afterwards as a retaliation, quote unquote, for the manufacturers using facilities in Bangladesh. So what could you do there as a risk treatment plan? You lower your profile, don't make it so much of a big noise about that you actually have manufacturing facilities in Bangladesh, although pretty much everybody does. And you heighten your defenses. You can add additional DDoS protections in order to make sure that any kind of additional traffic that comes your way can ultimately be deflected. And then the residual risk, the remaining risk that you have by being actually on the internet is the risk that you will have to accept. And you will have to live with that kind of risk that you have. So this was a little bit of an outlook of how you can actually use a risk management framework in the context of compliance standards in order to improve your overall security posture. And I would really hope that what you can take from this is that you really understand just going by compliance standards and going by lists is really not necessarily going to get you the kind of security posture that you're going to need. Instead, you really have to develop those augmenting controls, those additional safeguards on top of it as identified by the risk management process in order to be successful. And with this, I hope I'm okay in time. I'm open to questions if you have any. Yes, sir.
¿Alguna pregunta? Gerald, I like the question. All that letters, all those acronyms, all these different things that you can comply with. I think most of us here are not required by regulation to comply with this or that or the other. Although, obviously, it's very good to comply with this or that or the other.
Yep.
So my question is, how do you choose what to comply with? Because there's obviously a cost and effort associated with any of those.
Excellent question, Roberto. I really like that question. I mean, as you said, you are not necessarily required to comply with the HIPAA regulations in the U.S. because you're not dealing with any kind of medical situation in the U.S., so why bother? I think you really have to start looking at this from where you are today and where you want to develop your business into. So for example, a lot of you are accepting or will be accepting credit cards or similar instruments that are under the same kind of regulations by the card holder, by the card companies, and require you to be either PCI compliant or to be have select standards that are consistent or commensurate with the same kind of requirements that PCI has. So that would be like the first layer. That's really why I tried to spend a little bit extra time on PCI itself, because credit cards affect a lot of people, not necessarily everybody. But if you take a look around, I can go today into a store and buy for $10 a credit card reader, plug it into my iPhone, and start accepting credit cards. As a matter of fact, at that point in time, I am already subject to the PCI compliance. So even the smallest store that just swipes a card once a month would technically be required to be PCI compliant. In reality, probably not. Right? I mean, the reader and the application on the iPhone are actually PA ESS certified. So from that perspective, you already have a certain level of protection, by following those kind of selecting products that are compliant with that. But at the end of the day, as soon as your business starts to grow or you have a lot of credit card transactions, you have to follow those. If you expand it to the European Union, for example, or if you have any kind of business dealings with entities in the European Union, you have to be very cognizant about their privacy laws. So those kind of regulations then come into play. And that's essentially how I would really take a look at it. Where are you today with your business? What are the requirements that you have today? But also take a look a little bit further. Where do you want to be 2 years or 5 years down the road, and start preparing for those kind of standards as they come up.
¿Alguna otra pregunta? Gerald, I had an example in mind, and I thought I'd pop it up anyway. there is a relatively new e-procurement system being rolled out. And it's already working in, I don't know, a few dozen institutions. And the idea is to make it work throughout the government. Mm-hmm. It is very, very important to make sure that that system is safe. Mm-hmm. It is fair. Nobody has an undue advantage over anyone else. And both for the government and for people trying to sell to the government. So what sort of standards should, or how do you give the users the confidence that the system is safe and is fair?
It's a good question. In the context of government, maybe one could look a little bit at the example that the U.S. government has been looking at recently. The U.S. government has, through NIST, they have a number of controls and certain requirements. There's one document called the NIST 800-53 publication, which has a lot of those controls that you find in PCI, DSS, or other standards, and really talks in a lot of detail what needs to be done. If you take a look, for example, at something like an e-procurement system, the U.S. government has developed a compliance standard called FedRAMP. FedRAMP is a standard for cloud providers that want to work with the U.S. government that really takes a subset of those NIST controls and tries to make a reasonable approach in making sure that on the one side you have a secure system, on the other side you don't go overboard and start to really require everything from everybody at all times. So I think a similar approach here in this kind of context would be very useful, where you actually go in and you say, you start out with a list of controls that are generally accepted across the board, whether it's NIST or SOC 2 or ISO or whatever, it really doesn't matter that much. And then start to build from the requirements that you have for the system that you want to roll out, select the right controls to address the appropriate security concerns, and then really go in and make sure that you can make that available to everybody. Does that help? Or? Good.
Okay. ¿Tiene una pregunta? Okay.
I think I'm standing between lunch and everybody else, so I just want to thank you very much for your time, and see you later.
Thank you.